Hello to all you dogs out there. We're switching things up a little bit this week. Johnny betrayed the heck out of me, and he's celebrating Christmas with his family in Georgia. So he's left me to cover all the events that took place yesterday during the college football playoff. So as much as I think you guys probably want me to just jump right into the Tennessee game, I'm actually going to talk about them one by one in the order that they happen. So we'll get to the Tennessee game. Obviously, not the result I was hoping for, but I'm still repping the team. I'm still backing my team, even though it was an embarrassing show out. I'll explain more later. But let's start with Notre Dame, Indiana. That game went about as I think everyone expected it to, or most people expected it to. Indiana just played such a brutal schedule this season, and it really prepared them for the playoff. You could tell in that matchup against Notre Dame that they just went through the ringer this year, and they were ready to go when kickoff happened against Notre Dame. But their brutal schedule, I mean, it may just have took it all out of them this year, and they didn't have enough left to make a playoff run. So that's unfortunate for them. Notre Dame showed off a strong run game as they have all season. We'll see what they are able to do against Johnny's Bulldogs. However, I don't like their chances. So good luck to Johnny whenever they play Notre Dame. Hopefully they can take down the Catholics. We'll see. A touchdown Jesus won't be there, so that plays to Georgia's favor. And maybe maybe Notre Dame can have an impact on some of Georgia's players who keep getting arrested. Maybe they can just share the light of Jesus with them and change the trajectory of the Georgia football program. We'll see. We'll see. College game day was fun. We had two this weekend, which was incredible. We had one at Notre Dame, right in front of touchdown Jesus, which was cool. Shane Gillis, Nick Saban, that whole interaction was hilarious. The nickname Alabama Jones, and then seeing Saban's reaction to it, he was not having it. But Shane Gillis is a comedian, so it's to be expected. I thought it was hilarious. I've watched that video so many times. Let's go to the SMU Penn State game. That game, I thought going into it, SMU might have a chance. And this may be an unpopular take, but I sat down and watched every minute of that game. And in the first half, SMU was the better team. SMU was moving the ball up and down on Penn State. Penn State's offense wasn't doing much. Now, granted, their defense was scoring for them, so they weren't on the field as much. But I think if Kevin Jennings just doesn't forget how to play football, SMU's going into halftime with a lead. And now I'm not saying they could have won that game. They may not have worked out in the end, but their run game looked strong. They were able to move the ball on Penn State. And I don't know if Kevin Jennings just forgot what uniform his team was wearing, but those interceptions, I don't know who he was throwing to. I mean, it seriously looked like he forgot how to play football. I mean, and he's had a great season, and he's been slinging it all season. But I'm interested to see how Genty runs against that Penn State defense, because SMU is able to break off some pretty big runs against that defense. So if Boise State and Genty can do that, that'll make for an interesting game. So I'm excited for that matchup. SMU, unfortunately, fell short. Penn State moves on. However, I think Penn State fans should be a little nervous, and that may be a hot take because of what the score of the game was. But if you actually watch the game, I think Penn State did not play well in that first half. So we'll see what they do against Boise State. I could be wrong, and they could be a great team, and they could make a playoff run, but we'll see next week. Texas and Clemson, Battle of the Oranges. Yeah, Texas in the burnt orange, Clemson in that like reddish orange. And Texas, man, Clemson, I will say this, Clemson put up the most fight out of any underdog team in the first round. They got down early, but they kept fighting. They were able to score a little bit there towards the end, and they had their chances. But man, Texas, that offensive line put in absolute work. They almost rushed for 300 yards against Clemson's defense, and the O-line was battling injuries too. So that just goes to show you the depth that Texas has built since Sarkisian's been there. Saban has said over and over again that Sarkisian's really tried to build Texas as an SEC team, and you need dudes in the trenches to compete in the SEC, and it seems like Sarkisian's been able to find that and even has depth with that. That's one thing Tennessee struggled with this season. Shout out to Sarkisian for getting that and for the dominance they showed on the ground against a good Clemson team. I know a lot of people were saying that they shouldn't be in the playoff, but they're in the playoff for a reason. They have talent, and they're a well-coached team. So that's a good team that Texas beat. We'll see how Texas does against Arizona State. I would venture to say it's going to be a lot of the same. Now, to the final game, Tennessee at Ohio State. Let me just start by saying I am incredibly grateful for how far our team has come. Our football program made the playoff for the first time this year, and it finishes with a record of 10-3. I will never complain about that as a Tennessee fan because I know where we were before Heupel got here. Our football program was in the dumpster fire before Heupel got here and had been for 2 decades. And so I'm not going to sit here and complain about that. It was a disappointing game and an embarrassing showing, but hey, we were there. We were in the playoff, and I'm grateful for that. Now, the actual game, our fans showed up. Man, Vol Nation is incredible. We have one of the best fan bases in the country. I'll argue that tooth and nail. It doesn't matter whether our team is the best or we're horrible. Our fan base, we have some of the best fans in the country. I'd put us up against anybody. Our fans showed up. We took over College Game Day. We had a presence at the shoe. You could hear Rocky Top. You could hear the chants for Brew when he caught a pass. It was unprecedented for a visiting team. Kirk Herbstreit said in 29 years of doing College Game Day, he's never seen a visiting team have a presence like that. So shout out to Vol Nation, but hey, y'all showed up. Team unfortunately didn't. And honestly, Nico played a really gutsy game, so I want to give him props. But our offensive line did not play good enough to win that ball game. Our defense Johnny, I'll say this. Ohio State did the same thing against us that Georgia did. They targeted our linebackers. They took advantage of our young linebackers that were playing and just did motions all game that got the linebackers out of position, out of run fits. They didn't cover the edges on the pass game. I mean, they weren't tracking with these guys in motion or the running back out of the backfield. Jeremiah Smith, absolute dog. That dude is going to be awesome in the NFL. Shout out to him. But Tennessee, we just showed that our program's in a much better place, and we're trending up, but we're not an elite program yet. And I don't know if we're going to have the season we had this year next year. I honestly don't. Because I don't see we haven't proven we can win on the road. And until we do that, we will never be an elite program. So I see us next year, early predictions, I know. I think we're dropping our game at Alabama and at Florida, probably losing to Georgia at home, and potentially losing another one. I mean, I could see another 8-4 year like we had with Joe Milton 2 years ago. But all that to say, I'll take 8-4 over the 5-7 years losing to Georgia State like we had with Jeremy Pruitt. So I'm proud of Heupel. I'm proud of Tennessee for what they did this season. They gave a battered Tennessee fan like me hope that we could actually do something, and that is worth something to me. So shout out to the boys in orange. I know it didn't go how we wanted it to, but there's always next season. And we'll see what talent they can add, because that's what we need to close the gap with schools like Ohio State. So all that said, we've run through all the games. So now I'm going to pitch it over to myself and Johnny and our Christmas episode. I hope you guys enjoy. Merry Christmas. All right. Welcome to For My Dogs. This is a podcast that exists to help men become the best version of themselves and to talk about or to highlight that we can't do it alone, that we need other men in our life to encourage us along the journey. Got my dog Johnny here with me today.
Cheers, everyone. Got a Merry Christmas mug,
Got
Santa
my Christmas
hat.
sweater.
Yeah.
You
Oh,
can't see it. You can't see it. It's pretty Santa on the beach,
oh,
having a
nice.
martini by a
That
palm
is-
tree with lights.
You got a tree in the background.
Yeah, that's a real Christmas tree.
There
My
you go.
office smells fantastic.
How many needles are on the ground?
None yet.
Okay.
I just got it like Monday, probably.
Doing
We
good.
had a Christmas tree farm at our church, and they were doing like a half price thing because they're about to leave.
Very jolly.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, it's
I put the
Christmas
Ted
week.
Lasso ornament. You got me on there.
I see it right there.
Yep. It doesn't face forward.
It's
And I
awesome.
put Smokey on top because that's my dog.
I don't think a tree should be smoking, So maybe that's foreshadowing. Hey, dude,
That
but
would be all right.
Merry Christmas, Tucker.
Merry Christmas, Johnny.
Yes, you did. You did a great job in that intro.
Thank you.
Streaming. Yes, and it was Christmas week right now, and so we're in the holiday spirit of Santa Claus. So, if you clicked on this link for the podcast, you might be curious what we're going to talk about. Maybe my hat gives it away. We're talking about Santa Claus, but this is not the story that you've probably heard. And if you have heard it, congratulations! I love your dive into history. I take off my Santa Claus hat to you. Now, so this is going to be about the real Saint Nick, not the culture version today, because there actually was a real Saint Nick. And before we talk about him, we got to talk about a little backstory. Now, some people, I don't know if you do this, Tucker. Do you go see a movie on Christmas?
No.
I
We
know
just stay at the house pretty much.
Some people do. It's a big thing. And I know that the Gladiator 2 is out, and I want to see it really bad.
Yeah, me too.
And in the Gladiator, it's about gladiators fighting in the Roman Colosseum. And that's all. I mean, it's awesome. Like, it's due to the maximum level,
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, though, in the Roman Colosseum, in the beginning, a lot of it was persecuting Christians during those Roman Colosseum times. And that happened. It was a very common thing. The main religion in Rome was Roman mythology. And so Christians were against that. And so they were persecuted in the Colosseum until this guy named Constantine comes up. And he is the first Roman emperor who becomes a Christian. Now, before we have the comments below of, well, he wasn't a real Christian and he did other stuff. Okay, we get it. But he was at that time a Roman emperor who was a Christian, and he made it his goal to start moving the Christian faith more into Rome. And one thing that he did with that was he started this council called the Council of Nicaea. And I don't
Yeah. The Council of Nicaea is huge in church history. It's a big moment. The gist of the council is the conflict actually started in Alexandria, Egypt, which is like the second largest city in Egypt. And there was a guy named Arius who was in Alexandria. And what he was claiming is that since Jesus was created by God, that made him subordinate to God. And so then there was this bishop of Alexandria, ironically named Alexander, who protested this idea and said that Jesus was co-eternal with God, and so pretty much combating the idea that Jesus is somehow less than God. What the bishop of Alexandria is trying to say is, like, Jesus is co-eternal with God. They've always been one. Like, you can't, one of his examples was you can't separate light from light. Like, light's light. And so what he did is he started getting together clergy members to discuss this issue. Once Constantine heard about it, he was like, yeah, we need to deal with not only this issue, but there's some other issues we need to nail down. So the guess is there was probably 200 to 300 clergy members who gathered in the city of Nicaea, which is in modern day Turkey, to hash out some of these issues. And the main question they sought out to tackle was, can we worship God the Father and Jesus, claim that they are different, but still hold on to our monotheistic belief. And Muslims actually have a really, really hard time with this piece of Christianity. They wrestle with it. The Trinity is a big stumbling block. So they write the creed, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but if you're familiar with the Apostles' Creed, which is a very popular, well-known creed, sometimes gets read in churches, there's a song that someone wrote like music to the creed and you kind of sing it. But that's the most well-known, I would say. The Nicene Creed just takes a lot of what's in the Apostles' Creed, but really focuses on like elaborating on the relationship between God the Father and God the Son. So it has a lot more to say about that than the Apostles' Creed does. And it's because it was in response to this specific issue. So it's awesome that we're talking about this at the time of Christmas, because the incarnation, which is God becoming human, taking on flesh through the Virgin Mary, entering into the world, and then in that embodied human life, he showed us what it meant to truly be human, all the way through suffered in life, all the way to the point of death on the cross, and then rose again. But that story of the incarnation is what we're celebrating at Christmas, is that God stepped out of heaven to become human, to be with us, to be with his people. And that was the main thing that this creed was trying to tackle. And it's a central part of the creed if you actually go and read it. So why are we talking about the Nicene Creed? Why does it matter? Why is it important in church history? It matters because God's people, okay, the Israelites, the Jews, recited what's called the Shema. And they recited it up to 3 times a day. So, I mean, this was like embedded in who they were as the people of God. And the Shema is in Deuteronomy. It says, "Hear, O Israel, Yahweh our God, Yahweh is one." Meaning, this is where we get our monotheistic, meaning we believe one God, which is very opposed to what was popular in Rome at the time, when they had this pantheon
Yeah,
of gods.
polytheistic
Yeah,
is what they
polytheistic.
believed in. Yeah, more than one God.
Yeah, so the Christian view of God is monotheistic, and it's heavily tied to the Shema, which is what the people of Israel recited all the time. So that's why this conversation is important, because if Christians had failed to uphold that belief and they agreed with Arius and failed to defend this monotheistic claim, Christianity would have just resolved to be just another false religion in Rome, and just had been added with a pantheon of false gods. It just would have got thrown in with the rest of them. But this is what holds Christianity up as so unique, is that they believe that God is one, yet there's 3 distinct persons. And the Trinity is complicated. Johnny and I are not going to try and tackle everything about the Trinity right now. There's a lot of mystery involved. And the Council of Nicaea actually did a good job of still holding up that there is some mystery with the Trinity, which I think is very helpful. But another really important, you heard me say the name Yahweh, which is God's, that's how God describes himself. That's what the name that he gives Moses when Moses says, "Who are you?" And it means I am who I am. Or in other words, it means whatever, if you are like translating this into like plain English, whatever God is like, he's that way consistently. He's unshifting, stable, 24/7. So the Father and Jesus are one, and we see God and his character most clearly seen in the person of Jesus. We see his character on display in a human, which makes it easier for us to have that character embodied in us. And we would have lost that if Arius' view had prevailed. And this is why this is so significant. It's also important because the Christian view of the Trinity is a big piece of it is holding up that God exists in relationship. So the Holy Spirit, Jesus, God the Father exist in relationship. The Bible says that we're created in the image of God, meaning that aspect of existing in relationship means we were created for relationship because we're made in the image of God. And not only are we created for a relationship with God and with other people, but relationships are also how we're formed and how we grow and how we become who we were created to be. And so another reason we wanted to talk about this this creed and this historical moment is because really it protected the dignity and honor of having deep friendships. And one thing we talk about on this podcast all the time is how important it is for you to have deep, open, transparent, empathetic, honest relationships in your life and friendships in your life. And you need to make sacrifices to prioritize and be intentional with those friendships and those relationships. So this event happened a long, long time ago, but it has an impact even today. And getting back to old Saint Nick, he, ironically enough, it's debated, but there's good historical reason to believe that he was a part of the Council of Nicaea. He was there
Yeah.
helping guide the minds of that gathering to the conclusion that they came to, which has made it to where we today can look at it and be like, wow, I'm so glad the Trinity exists because it encourages me to have deep friendships and deep relationships in my life, not just acquaintances where we know basic things about people, but in inviting us into a deeper level of relationship. And so it's really cool. And he was a bishop at the time. And so he was a bishop in the city of Myra in Turkey. So it's very likely he for sure was invited, and it's very likely that he attended the Council of Nicaea. And I know, Johnny, you want to share a cool story that would suggest that he was there.
Yeah, because like this goes on with any kind of like history event, is that there's always debates on either side, but you can kind of like narrow it down. So yeah, he may not have had like a major role in it, but old Santa Claus was there, and not the Americanized Santa Claus, like the actual Saint Nick. And the reason why he was is because Saint Nick was a defender for the Trinity, and Arius, like Tucker said, was against the Trinity. And Saint Nick just got so ticked off with Arius that record shows that he actually slapped him across the face out of rage. And listen, Arius goes back and he regrets that, but I kind of like it a little bit, but I also don't recommend it. Have you seen the movie?
I don't think you should slap people you disagree with.
Well,
that's probably not the best
No,
move.
okay, yeah, I'm not saying that, but have you seen the movie Violent Night?
Is that the one with
I don't know I was trying to think of the actor
from Stranger Things?
Yes. Okay. Yes. It's a movie about where he's delivering a present to this house, and then the house gets robbed, and he just kicks all the bad guys' butts. So I do like that part of Santa Claus. However, I'm not recommending you slap someone in the face if you disagree with them. So,
and real quick before we move on, going back to just the Trinity, and Saint Nick was all about, we need to hold to the monotheistic belief while also upholding the importance of the Trinity and their relationship. I wanted to read a quote from a book I've been reading called Relational Spirituality, and it's about how, because God exists in Trinitarian relationship, we also are created for relationships like I talked about earlier. But the author says this, and I think this is why it's important for us to talk about this now and to get back to the actual story of who Saint Nick is. The author says, this is particularly important in our present historical moment, talking about the relational nature of the Trinity, in which loneliness, racial injustice, and societal division are widespread. When the body of Christ collectively loves its members and extends this love by bringing compassion to the world, especially to those who are marginalized, we act in the name of the Trinity and reflect the image of God in which we were made. I think that's so cool. And that piece about showing compassion, especially to those who are marginalized, Saint Nick embodied this in his life. And I know you want to share a story about that too, Johnny.
Yeah, so Saint Nick, again, that incident happened, and there's other records of himself saying how he was like, all right, I got out of hand. I shouldn't have done that. And so he wasn't a perfect person. However, he was a active believer, and he was a defender for the faith. And the way he even lived that out was the actual Saint Nick, the real person. He was a generous person. He came from a wealthy Christian family, but used his inheritance to pay and to give money to people in need. And there's one story in particular. It's about this family who was very poor at the time, and he threw some like gold coins, and it's debated where he threw them, in the window or the chimney, whatever, but more likely probably in the window, and it landed in there, and he did it not based off of their behavior, not because of they were good kids. He just did it because he loved them, and he knew that they were in need of something, and he never went and said, "Hey, by the way, I did this for you." He just gave them the coins, and they never knew who did it. And so like the actual Saint Nick actually gave gifts at night, which is really cool. And that's where the story now has not gotten modernized. Sorry, I have Lucy here, and she's saying hey to me, but is now getting modernized into our culture of Santa Claus coming at night. But the real Saint Nick actually did that, and now we have it's been changed a bunch of times, and now we have this thing called like the naughty and nice list, right?
Mm-hmm. And the North Pole,
and
the
elves,
the whole
the
thing.
reindeer, right?
Yeah, the sleigh,
the sleigh, yes.
Yeah.
And so
Polar Express,
Polar Express,
Mount Crumpet.
Polar Express is creepy, and I'll just say that. But we're going to get past that. That animation creeped me out as a kid. But so this naughty and nice list, okay? Let's break this down a little bit. As a Christian, you may be wondering, how can I share Santa Claus and teach Santa Claus to my kids if I'm a Christian believer? Well, let's break this down for a little bit and just compare Santa Claus and, God our Father. If there actually was a naughty list, everybody in the world would be on it. There would not be a single person on the nice list. So Tucker, I'm sorry, you wouldn't be on the nice list, no matter how hard you try. And so thinking that there's these two different, there wouldn't be. I had a ethics professor in college, and I went to a Christian college, and the professor said, if you took out, someone says, why is there bad things in the world? And the professor says, if you took out every bad thing in the world, where would you stop? Because eventually you would be taking yourself out of the world, right? Because we've all have done something. We're all sinners. Romans 3:10 says, no one is good, no, not one. And so unfortunately, the naughty list would be full and the nice list would be empty. And that's what gets involved into the real meaning of Christmas. It's because we are all sinners and because we are all imperfect people, this is why we need Christ. Christ came down to save us from our sin. I have a favorite quote or favorite lyric, and it's from Grace Alone, which is my favorite worship song. And it says, I worked my fingers down to the bone. Nothing I did could ever atone. But Jesus, you paid my debt. So meaning we can't do anything. We are so imperfect. We are sinners, and we cannot pay for our own sin. If we try, if you want to get back into there, in the Old Testament, they had laws. You had to do all this, and there's over 100 certain laws, and there's no way anyone could ever make that perfect. And those laws are not meant to save us. They're meant to point us to Jesus, saying, yes, you can't do this, but Jesus can. And so just as, Saint Nick gave gifts out of love for the kids, Christ gave us salvation out of love for us. Not because we could do anything, right? We cannot earn our salvation. And so Christ came down because he loved us. Out of the love for himself, because he is love, he came down. And so if you're thinking, okay, this is Christmas, but you're sounding like Easter. No, Christmas points to Easter. The reason for Christmas is the reason for Easter. It was all part of the plan. And so Christmas is about God coming down. And like Tucker said with the Nicene Creed, that is still the Trinity. He is still God. And because he was fully God and fully man when he came down, that was the only way he could save us from our sins. And so that's the connection you can make with it. Obviously, don't spiritualize Santa Claus, but you can show your kids, look, Santa, you're getting gifts not because of anything you've done, not because you've been nice this year, just because out of love. And then you can also say, God gave you salvation, not because of anything you've done, but because of his love for you.
Yeah, and I think when we're thinking about Jesus in this season, if you're in the church, if you're in church circles, it can get really repetitive just hearing the Christmas story over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
But I think of a passage like Philippians 2:5-11, and Paul tells the church he's writing to, he says, in your relationships with one another. So he's starting with this relational, Trinitarian concept we've been talking about that, good old Saint Nick went to bat for at the Nicaean Council. He says, in your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, becoming a baby, the most vulnerable thing on the planet. Like, babies can't do anything for themselves. And he chose to take on that form, being made in human likeness, being found in appearance as a man. He humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. Therefore, God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name that is above every name, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue acknowledge that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. And I think, my reflections on this season, I will confess, even as a pastor, I struggle with the repetitiveness of reading the Christmas story every year, and it just feels like it's the same thing. And I feel like I forget what is really going on with Christmas just because I've heard it so many times.
Mhm.
And as I've been reflecting, and even when we started talking about going into the history of Santa Claus and who Saint Nick actually was, to me, his story is perfect for what the Christmas season is all about, because Saint Nick was a complex mixed bag of good and bad, right? Like,
Mhm.
yes, he gave gifts to the marginalized, and he took care of the poor, and would have just had this radical generosity, but he also, in a fit of rage, slapped a heretic in front of everyone and disgraced him as a human being. So, you can deduce from that like, he's a mixed bag. It's complex. As humans, we're all that way. We're
Right.
all a mix of good and bad. It goes back to the garden where God said to Adam and Eve, just trust me. Don't eat from this one tree, the knowledge of good and evil. Just trust me. I've provided everything for you in abundance. And what Eve does is she gets tempted by the enemy, and her and Adam both say, you know what? We think we know best. We're going to define good and evil on our own terms. And then the rest of the biblical story is just human after human after human who's a mixed, complex bag of both good and bad, because they're defining good and evil on their own terms rather than trusting in God. And when we do that, we just are wreaking havoc on the world that God created, because we're not trusting and leaning into his definition of good and evil and the way that he's told us true life happens. Like, in the garden, he was giving Adam and Eve, like, if you just do what I say, you will have true eternal life.
And they
And
couldn't.
they chose to
Yeah.
do it their own way. And so what God did in the Christmas story that we're celebrating, what God did is he said, I'm sick and tired of seeing humans wreak havoc on other humans that I created and on the world that I created. So I'm going to come down out of love and compassion to be present with them. I'm going to become one of them. And so that's what he did at Christmas. And he came to show us the life that we were created for. And Jesus' death on the cross and resurrection are super important for the Christian faith, but we should never overlook the life that he lived, because he was showing us the way that we're meant to live day in, day out. And Saint Nick obviously recognized this. He was moved to do those generous things because of who Jesus was. It wasn't just because he had a good heart or something along those lines. It was just because the story of Jesus moved him to do that. And I think that can be true for us today. The incarnation, God coming to earth as a man, shows us that God loves his people so much. He wants to be with them. He wants to be in relationship with them, to pull us out of darkness and into his light. And then he wants to empower and enable us to spread light to other people as well. The Christmas season is a perfect opportunity to do that. And so we have some practical things we'll get to here in a second about things you could do this Christmas season to be a light in your community, to spread the love and compassion of Jesus. And that will make a more memorable and meaningful Christmas for you than whatever you could think the best gift you got is, a best memory you have as a kid. If you can embody the love and compassion of Jesus this Christmas, I promise you'll have a more memorable and meaningful Christmas than you've ever had before.
Yeah, and
But
oh, sorry.
go ahead.
No,
Go
no,
ahead.
okay. No, you hang up first. But so as a teacher, I really I can't share my Christian faith as a teacher, but I really want to do everything I can, but be that explicit with it. You know what I mean? And so this Thursday or Wednesday, I don't know what day it was, but I told my kids, I said, I have one more lesson for you before you leave for break. And I put up this quote, and it said, Christmas spirit is about generosity without thinking about getting anything. And they were like, no, Christmas is about getting and receiving stuff. And I was like, yeah, I mean, you're 11 years old, so you probably have that mindset. I don't blame you for having that mindset. However, I said, and you don't even have to believe in Christmas at all, because again, as a teacher, trying to be careful with that. But I was like, no matter what, like if you don't celebrate it or whatever, you can still practice this spirit of giving, because as people, we, if you want to, if like Gandhi tried to make this world a better place and he wasn't, a believer, people try to do that. The root of this is coming from Christianity, right? Whether they think that or not, but the root is coming from Christianity of Christ giving himself for his people. And so that's what I did is I had them all write. Sorry, Lucy is just attacking my.
I saw her tail a second ago.
Yeah. It's about giving. And so I had my students write letters to teachers and saying, thank you for what you've done. And some of them were just all getting all upset. Oh, I don't want to do this. Like, oh, bro, I don't want to do this. I said, first off, I'm not your bro. Second off, I was like, you're going to do this. And I said, because my job is to teach you history, but it's also to make you better than when you came in here, whether I have to force you to do that. And it was really cool, though, because I got all the letters and I gave them to teachers, and some of them came up to me and said that, like, they were tearing up from that because they didn't and they didn't think that, what they were doing actually mattered maybe. Like, I don't know. And I told my students, I said, you have no idea, because this holiday isn't always joyful for people. I think you said this for Thanksgiving is this might be the first holiday that someone does not have a loved one with them, or maybe as a family is struggling financially, or maybe, they're battling with something inside and they haven't told anybody about that. So simply like practicing like Jesus about just giving himself, and then also practicing like Saint Nick, or he just gave to people in need. We can do that to people, not for our own satisfaction, just so that we can do it out of love for that. And you have no idea the impact. And you know what, brother, you may never even see the impact of that. But that's not the point. The point is not to see the impact. The point is just to be faithful with it.
Yeah, and that's what Paul talks about in that Philippians 2 passage, right? Is that Jesus gave himself up for people, and he humbled himself and was obedient to the point of death on the cross. And that's not just some cliche or something. That he was doing that to show us that that is actually the path to life, is that dying to yourself, giving up of yourself, giving yourself to others, that is the path to true life. That's what we were created for. I think that's really important. Another thing Paul shares in that passage is that, when Christ was resurrected, he's existed this way eternally, which was what Alexander, the bishop of Alexandria, was arguing against Arius, is that Jesus has existed, reigning as king and Lord over the universe since the beginning. But after his resurrection, Paul makes sure to point out that he's back seated at the right hand of God. And he is, every knee will bow at his name, and he is Lord over creation and over the earth. And I think for us, when we enter into this season, no matter what it is you're facing, whether you've lost, a parent or a sibling or a friend this year, and this is going to be your first Christmas without them, or your parents just went through a divorce and you don't know how you're going to navigate the differences that this holiday brings, having to be split between two families. And if you don't know, maybe you lost your job right before the holiday started and you don't know how you're going to buy gifts for people, or, something along that line. Whatever it is you're facing, Jesus is a good, loving king.
Mm-hmm.
And if you will put your trust in him, that's how salvation comes. Jesus came to invite the same trust that he invited Adam and Eve into, he invites us into today, to say, I'm not going to trust my own definitions of good and evil or why this thing happened to me or why that thing happened to me. I'm going to trust God and what he says about it. And I'm going to lean on him, and Jesus will carry you through, and the community of other believers can carry you through the darkest valley. I mean, Psalm 23, you go to that. Jesus is there with you in the valleys. He's a good shepherd, and he will be right there by your side in the valley, but he's also going to help you lead you out of the valley. And so this Christmas season, just put your trust in Jesus. He is the saving King. He's reigning as King of the universe, and he is at work in the world to set all things right, but it's not going to happen fully until he comes back one day. And so we look in anticipation for when God comes back to earth again. And that's another piece of Christmas, is this hopeful anticipation of Jesus returning and fully making all things right in the world that we live in. But before we kind of wrap this up, I just wanted for us to give you just some practical, small, easy things you can do this Christmas season that hopefully will have a big impact on the holidays for you. So one, I would recommend that you take some time and schedule a meal with a close friend during this holiday season. We talked about it early in the podcast. Deep friendships require a deep level of intentionality. And too often in this season, we get so busy that we don't make time for our friends. And I'm not talking about going to a Christmas party where there's like 20 people there and you only get to talk to someone for, 10 minutes at a time. I'm saying pick one person that you're trying to be intentional about developing close friendship with, schedule a breakfast, a lunch, or a dinner, or even just a coffee with them. But breaking bread together is so important during this season to strengthen relationships. It's such a powerful tool. So schedule a meal with a close friend. Johnny, you and I actually just did this last week.
About time too, which is crazy.
Yeah, we realized that we hadn't been intentional with our friendship, and we just kind of let the podcast take place of us spending time together. And so after we recorded last week, we went out to a brewery, had a couple drinks, and caught up and talked, and it was just awesome. My soul was so full after that.
And it's crazy because we just talking about Saint Nick, like you can practice things and not be perfect. Like we preach this stuff and we were lacking on that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I also want to say is like, what's the quote from Dan about if you think about doing it and you don't?
The law of diminishing intent.
Yeah. And so like, just like how I had my students write thank you notes to the teachers, I mean, reach out to people. Don't just say Merry Christmas and copy and paste that to 50 people on your phone. Like, if you want to start small steps because maybe you don't feel like the courage to actually go do something, or you feel like you can't, start small. Create small steps, and just by thanking someone and making it personal, or saying you miss them, or just saying, hey man, been thinking about you, been praying for you, and you have no idea. Maybe God put that on your heart because they needed to hear that. And so just like show the love of Christ this Christmas, and the love and the actions that Saint Nick did this Christmas by helping others out and doing this out of love, not by any selfish reasons.
Yeah. Another practical thing is, in the spirit of good old Saint Nick, the actual historical figure, not, the mainline Santa Claus figure, ask yourself, who do I know that has a need? Who do I know that has a need? And then once you think of that thing, start working to meet that need. And it's not like you got to do it by Christmas. By the time you hear this episode, that's going to be in a couple days. But just even through the start of the new year, you can still carry on, the Christmas season and what it means by just asking that simple question. Who do I know that has a need, and how can I work to meet that need? And to just kind of wrap everything up, we titled the episode is Santa Real because we wanted to equip our listeners with a way when maybe you have young kids and you're dreading getting asked the question, is Santa real one day? Or maybe you haven't had kids yet and you're trying to navigate how you're going to tackle the whole Santa thing because it is so widespread in our culture. we wanted to just present this to say, hey, you can still have Santa be a part of your Christmas, but also still stay rooted to the true meaning of Christmas, which is that God loved us enough to come to earth as a human and show us the way. Jesus refers to himself as the way, the truth, and the light. And he came to show us the way, to bring us out of darkness and into light. And you can weave all of that into your Christmas season with your family, with your kids, with conversations that you have around a dinner table by knowing who Santa Claus is actually based off of, which is St. Nicholas. So we hope this has been interesting and helpful to you. Maybe it's something you haven't thought about in the Christmas season. It's definitely something I haven't thought about before. So this
No,
was a new journey for me.
yeah, and when you and I were doing this, and it was really cool because like the more I was studying about this, I was like, I didn't realize the connection between Saint Nick and Christianity actually. And so
Yeah.
it's really cool to learn about that. And if maybe you're not a believer and you made it all the way to the end of this podcast and you have questions, you can email us, DM us on Instagram or TikTok, or you can message us on Spotify, and we would love to talk about it. This is not an altar call, but this is simply if you're curious or something, we would love to answer any questions you have or talk to you about this.
Yeah. And our email is formydogs, DAWGS24@gmail.com. And all of our socials are formydogs, DAWGS_UTUGA. That's all of our social media handles. Please, honestly, guys, even if you listen to the podcast all the time, please reach out to us. We want to have a connection with our listeners. And so, maybe some of you probably have our phone numbers, but just reach out, text us. We want to stay in touch, especially during this season when it can be really lonely and a really tough time. Reach out to us. We would love to be a listening ear and to just see how you're doing. And another really practical thing that I'm going to ask you guys to do is, if you enjoyed this, you thought it was beneficial, share it with one person. Share it with one other dude in your life. Just send them a quick text. Hey, just listen to this podcast. It was great. You should check it out. That's all you got to say. It doesn't have to be anything complicated.
Yeah, please.
But that really helps. We know that those of you that listen are fully on board with the mission and vision of why we started this podcast. And so that's a huge way you can help the message get to more people. So thank you guys for being consistent listeners. We can't thank you enough for that. It means the world to us. So yeah, we appreciate you guys, and we hope you have a Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
So go be like St. Nicholas and go be a dog today.
And go be like old Saint Nick and go be there for your dogs.